Hey, folks, I'm Aaron. You're listening to a true crime podcast about the brutal murders that rocked a small town in Idaho in the late... Wait, our producer is signaling me that we're not a true crime podcast? We're not? How are we supposed to make money? How are we supposed to get picked up on a network? Do any of us even have vocal fry? Well, since we're not doing that, I guess this is The Right Can't Read. I'm joined by someone who isn't a millennial, isn't wearing a Slay All Day Then Rosé shirt, and probably doesn't have a Ring doorbell and have questionable views about black people. Who are you? Respond now while I delete my script and quickly write a new one.
I am Robert Sharkey, someone who thought I was being on a true crime podcast because I wanted to make money, but apparently we're doing something else now.
Yeah, this is this is the problem. Why I kept rambling that we should never have a producer, but then we went and got a producer, and now apparently we're not a true crime podcast because, quote, the market is saturated, or, quote, it's unethical. I don't know. Whatever.
There definitely hasn't been too many true crime podcasts. We need one more group of people profiting off of murder.
I think so. Folks, listeners, I know you tuned in thinking this was going to be a true crime podcast, but hold off on that. Put a pin in it. We're going to come back to that later. We're going to turn this into a true crime podcast. I swear to God. But in the meantime, I have potentially the most important question we will ever ask on this show. Robert, do you like metal?
Well, I wish I did.
That's the wrong.
The
answer.
The only intersection of metal I've ever gotten into is the one that overlaps with Irish people.
That's good. There's a lot of that. You don't like metal. That's fine. I'm going to quote a guy on the internet who got recorded outside of a Manowar concert at an undetermined time and the sometimes past. And this brilliant man said, "You motherfuckers who don't like Manowar are afraid of yourselves. You are afraid of Manowar." So if you don't like metal, you're afraid of yourself and of metal, and also possibly the Nazis that listen to metal. We're going to get into that. Now, you may be wondering, is Aaron trying to turn this into a straight up pop culture podcast? Is this son of a bitch trying to stage a coup? Now, as much as I want to turn this into a place from which I can rant about pop culture, that's not what I'm going to talk about today. Now, what I want to talk about is the infatuation of the far right on a scene that is predominantly full of nerds, and why this is a problem. Not the nerds, the far right thing. You see, this popped into my mind recently after chat logs leaked into the public from a Facebook group chat among the members of the relatively popular pirate-themed power metal band Ailstorm. These chat logs included some typical machismo posturing that you see from musicians the world over, but also some straight-up horrific racist jokes and comments. These were addressed by at least one member of the band, but it still made me think about how much it really, really sucks when you find out that a member of a band you like is a prick. Then it made me think about how much it sucks when you find out that an entire band you like are literal fascists. That, in turn, made me think about how that is a uniquely metal-centric problem, how bands that take their names from Tolkien lore can profoundly miss the point of Lord of the Rings and espouse race hate. Or, alternatively, how an entire subgenre, black metal, is, to use the parlance of our times, sus. Is that the right term? Am I one of the youth?
You're definitely one of the youth now. I like to imagine the pain with which you wrote that.
There's no pain. It's just nothing but love. that sentence is probably sus itself. Now, it is, you see, a huge bummer, and I'd like to talk about it with you and our listeners. Maybe along the way, we'll think about how these sorts of things bleed into mainstream culture. Not necessarily metal, because you're probably not going to hear King Diamond, much less Gorgoroth or Cattle Decapitation in a mainstream movie. But how fascism's syncretic nature means that it pops up in the strangest of places. But before we get into tying this to what we've discussed in past episodes, before we start debating whether or not you can call Mordor a fascist state, we need to talk a little bit about the history of this style of music. Context, as they, Red Eye, say, is king. And a whole lot of what comes out today in the metal genre makes zero sense if you don't know where it comes from. Some sources attribute metal's beginnings to the acid rock genre, with Cream, Iron Butterfly, Steppenwolf, and yes, Led Zeppelin forming the bedrock.
Cream was the peak of metal music.
Cream was the peak of metal. We all, deep inside, as we're in an Amon Amarth show in the rowing pit, going like, yeah, sing to me about berserkers and shield walls. We're really wanting them to start singing Sunshine of Your Love.
Yes, Disraeli Gears slaps, and I don't care that he did something horrible to his child.
Everyone's terrible. This is the lesson that you learn if you do any sort of like reading about any artist, or
if you've ever Googled a thing.
If you've ever Googled a thing, you learn that it's terrible, and you're probably bad for liking it too.
Yes.
Especially Cream. Cream is the worst. Cream are, I'm not going to say any more without a lawyer present.
Second only to Ace of Base on the list of terribleness.
That one's a weird one.
Actual Nazi Ace of Base guy.
Nazi Ace of Base guy. And you would think it would be Falco.
Yeah.
But no, Ace of Base. And not even like Kraftwerk.
Yeah.
And like, when I was in high school and middle school, like Rammstein was the one that people were like, "Oh, they're Nazis," and it's like, nah, they're pretty legit. Like they've got a song that came out fairly recently called Deutschland, and it's just about the history of Germany and how bad the Nazis were for a good chunk of it. And no, they're good people. And no, it's Ace of Base.
Ace of Base.
It's very strange. Very, very strange. Now, Ace of Base, not Led Zeppelin, not Cream, not Iron Butterfly. They're in the 80s. In the 80s, well, it should never have happened, but it did. So we have to get over it and just accept that and move on with our lives. Now, we can get deep into music theory when we're talking about, acid rock and that, but we're not going to do that. What we will do is we're going to say that the bands, they were the progenitors, and went beyond that. It's largely technical. When you're trying to figure out where metal comes from, you need to go to the roots, rock and roll. If not technically, then spiritually. Rock and roll, as it was originally birthed into the world, was fully counterculture. It stood against the mores of the era in which it operated. It provided an outlet for people with alternate views of life to express themselves outside jazz, which by that time was infested by beatniks. And of course, it was loud. Rock and roll found its avatar in metal and heavy music in the great godhead Lemmy of Motorhead. A Jack Daniels consuming, pinball playing volume enthusiast, Lemmy embodied the spirit of the genre with his James Brown fixation and constant presence on the scene. Indeed, this figure with the Wehrmacht memorabilia and we're already at the Nazi shit. We're already there. We'll get into the Nazi shit in a little bit, but let's bring this in before I just start rambling at you about how much I love Motorhead. The whole Wehrmacht thing, it's not great. So the thing about
that's the tagline to the Wehrmacht. Not great.
Not great.
The whole thing, not great.
Yeah, and Lemmy's whole thing is, I'm not even gonna try to do an impression of it, but he's like, I just think it looked cool, and I like history. And
it does look cool. That's the problem.
I know.
For Motorhead.
Yeah, and what are you gonna do? It's like I don't know. Sabaton also gets roped into this stuff because Sabaton, if you don't know, are a power metal band from Sweden, and they do a lot of like history stuff, and they do stuff about World War II. So Nazis tend to like them, even though one of their albums is an American soldier punching a Nazi in the throat.
There are only 2 World War II history guys. Choose one.
Lemmy and the guy from Sabaton.
Yeah.
So it's all complicated. Now, in addition to the rock and roll mentality, you have heaviness. This is heaviness both in technical approach and in theme. Most important for metal as a broad genre is theme. You can have a couple of metal bands in a bar that sound nothing alike. Take, for example, Judas Priest and Gorgoroth. Nothing in common, really, and calling them both metal is like saying it's warm out there when the temperature hits 116 degrees. I'm assuming you don't know who Gorgoroth are.
No, but I do know Judas Priest, so...
Hey, there you go. So Gorgoroth are a black metal band. I think they were one of the bands that came out of the first wave of Norwegian black metal. Very like they pushed like the "we worship Satan, we like blood" thing a lot. And one of the lead singer for a while of the band, a guy named Gall, is a very tall, intimidating looking man who was once arrested and tried for all right, full story. He was being harassed by the locals in his town, so he kidnapped one of them, tied him up in his house, and bled him for about 8 days, I think, and then let him go. And
that's awesome. I love that chain of thought. Like, they'll never make fun of me now.
Yeah, I think it generally stopped after he started just kidnapping people and bleeding them. So now he does he makes art. He's touring with a couple other bands. There's a very weird interview from like 2009, I think, with some Vice journalists who go to talk to Gall, and it's something. So when I talk about heaviness, I refer to stuff that's at the core of the genre: the occult, dark fantasy, horror, weird shit in general. I am of the camp that the first metal band was Black Sabbath. Ozzy Osbourne, Tony Iommi, and the other members of the band did more to define the genre than anyone else. Heaviness of Led Zeppelin songs and their sometimes nods towards Tolkien aside. You see, Sabbath's first album, titled Black Sabbath, with the song Black Sabbath, they may have been boundary breakers, but they weren't particularly original, contained the seeds that grew into the massive genre we have today. While the album Black Sabbath is slow, down-tuned, and bears little to no resemblance to subgenres like thrash metal, it does contain 2 important elements. 1, a fixation on the occult with, as famed music critic Lester Bangs put it, quote, doggerel tribute to Aleister Crowley, and 2, themes across the board of, quote, the unpleasantness of reality with its wars, political corruption, environmental destruction, crime and punishment, substance abuse, mental illness, and death. Or, in the words of a blog called Music is a Journey, the counterpoints to, quote, the hippie idealisms of universal love and peace. These 2 elements, occultism and taking a look at the bleaker aspects of life, are of massive importance to the genre. Without those 2 things, you just have Iron Butterfly. But with those 2 things, you have the seeds for future groups like Venom, Sleep, Megadeth, Gojira, and so many more. The other important component of metal is frequently speed. In genres that are not doom, stoner, or sludge, you'll run into terms like blast beats or thrash or any number of other terms that I'm too lazy to think of right now.
The guy who names metal genre is the same guy who names weed strains.
I think that's exactly true for the stoner and sludge metal.
Yeah.
Genres.
Sludge metal.
There's so like one of my favorite bands, Mastodon, veers pretty heavily into like the progressive metal and stoner and sludge territories a lot, and their drummer has a weird clown fixation, So like his drum kit on stage has a bunch of clowns dangling from it. I love it. It's just this fantastic. So this is where metal has some overlap with the 70s punk scene and why groups like Motorhead get claimed by both punks and metalheads. If you want to steer clear of that sort of conversation, though, you can take a look at groups like UK's Saxon and Judas Priest. As artist Preston Cram puts it, they embraced a more upbeat, rollicking sound driven by power chords, invigorating guitar solos, and catchy vocal hooks, all packed into accessible pop song structures. And I want to make a quick note about when you hear pop structures in context of metal, that's just referring to stuff that's not 15 minutes long with 7 minutes guitar solos.
Accessible to people who don't want to have their ears bleed.
Yeah, it's one of the reasons that Judas Priest is kind of the one of the bands that you're going to find in like every dive bar jukebox. Because it's pretty catchy. And then like Electric Eye is a really awesome song. Good stuff. But what we need to focus on again is why Nazis invade the scene and pump out tripe like National Socialist black metal. After all, they probably are not excited that Rob Halford of Judas Priest is an out gay man who cleans bondage gear while imploring people to stay at home and adhere to quarantine mandates. A fantastic video near the start of the COVID plague that everyone should watch. Just Rob Halford delivering a great monologue about the importance of hygiene and being courteous to one another as he's cleaning whips and ball gags and everything else.
I assume a gimp suit would help you not get COVID if you wore it to the supermarket. Just a suggestion to the listeners.
And it would probably be easy to clean.
Yeah, just soak it.
Yeah,
do it.
Listeners, go out.
Go out.
Go out. Get your gimp suits. Go to the supermarket.
Especially if you live in rural Oklahoma or Texas.
Especially if you live in rural Oklahoma or Texas. But so let's figure out or try to why they do invade. In metal, we have occult fixation, we have speed, we have counterculture. Pair that with the late 70s predilection for stuff like punk bands sporting swastikas, and you have a perfect storm ready for Nazis to try and make inroads. Both punk and metal have aggressive music, which yields stuff like mosh pits, which often, sadly, turn into opportunities for roid-ridden douchebags to beat the shit out of smaller people before the crowd turns on them. And who, I ask you, loves aggro more than the right wing? And further, who loves weird occult shit like the extreme right, who gives us stuff like the Q Shaman, and keep even weirder shit like Theosophy alive?
Oh, fuck. I met an actual honest-to-God Theosophist the other day.
You live in a strange, horrifying place.
Like, actually told me that climate change was going to be fine if we all changed our vibes, man.
Did they get into like ley lines or anything, or did it not go that far?
I'm sure they did. It's a member of it's a member of extended family, so I couldn't be like, so what about Rudolf Steiner? But they did talk about
coward. You coward.
I didn't ask them about why, if they actually talked to angels like they claimed.
Oh, yeah. We're gonna get into it in a little bit, but like all that weird French stuff like Thule,
hell yeah,
and Hyperborea, and all that stuff. It's crazy. There was a great video. It's probably still on YouTube because YouTube is YouTube. Yep. Years ago, back when I thought conspiracy theories were harmless and it would never turn into what we have today, of a group that was ripping off a video game critic collective called, and the video game collective is like extra credits. Mm-hmm. And so they were ripping off their style down to the animation and the presentation, and they were called like Spirit Science or something like that. And they did this 2-hour-long video about like the truth of Atlantis as spoken by Thoth, and how Jews were originally Martian.
Hell yeah.
It's all comes back to Nazis.
All comes back to Nazis.
A naive fool to think that it was fun at one point.
I fucking miss the days when I could just believe the federal government assassinated John F. Kennedy and no one asked me any further questions.
Yeah, I mean, that's just entry level. My mom's boyfriend believes that he's no, all right, never mind.
Now everyone looks at you weird when you say the Joint Chiefs of Staff killed a sitting president. Fucking people, QAnon, right? Ruining everything.
Just ruined everything. You can't have fun anymore. You can't go, oh, hey, look at this 3-hour-long video about how there were nukes deployed in 1812 and all mountains were actually giant trees. Now you can't even have fun with that anymore.
Yeah. I really blame Alex Jones. He ruined conspiracy theories.
It's definitely maybe that's something that we should do as a future episode.
Oh, about how the right ruined conspiracy
How the right ruined conspiracy theories.
Hell yes. Conspiracy theories used to be some iconic left-wing shit. Like, you had the protocols of the Elders of Zion and like a few other real bummer ones. But Copy to All is just a rant about how rich people are constantly trying to fuck you on purpose.
Yeah. Now it's all ruined.
Yeah.
But you know what's not ruined?
The protocols of the Elders of Zion.
Well, no, that I guess it can't be ruined if it was already ruined already. Now, metal music isn't ruined.
Yep.
Somehow. Now, to avoid this becoming an exhaustive history of the metal genre, you're welcome. We're going to thankfully pretend like most of the 80s never existed. We're going to skip ahead to the late 80s and the 90s and talk about how the occultism of Black Sabbath became a huge part of the more extreme metal edges of the genre, created even broader inroads for the hard right to infest the scene, and how alongside this, those extreme elements turned from counterculture to counter-subculture. At the forefront, I have to be absolutely clear, metal is an overwhelmingly white genre. There are exceptions, but they are exceptions. The reasons why this is the case it's hard to break down, but Lena Dawes, journalist and author of a really good book about the scene called What Are You Doing Here? A Black Woman's Life and Liberation in Heavy Metal, puts it one way that I like a lot. Quoting, in some ways, it's a self-perpetuating thing. There's still this resistance because it's loud and angry and aggressive, and not everyone wants to listen to it. And there's this stereotype where people see heavy metal as being a bastion of racism. They see the people who are listening and playing the music as being the same people who threaten to beat them up on the street. There are a lot of stereotypes that hinder active participation. Now, before we go further, I want to mention that you should read the book. It's really good. It's a good look into a niche scene from an even more niche perspective. And even though it's about heavy metal, it's excellent food for thought for how so many scenes, regardless of the media content, become self-segregating. You can take a look at the lineups of the overwhelming number of metal bands and see a sea of pasty white nerds, but very few people of color. As Dawes gets at above, it's hard to engage with the genre when you don't see people like you on stage. There is, further, an issue of there being a lot of questionable stuff out there. Take, for example, one of my favorite people in history, Lemmy. All of that Wehrmacht stuff that we mentioned earlier, it's hard to get past. Even when you hear him talk about it in interviews, the stuff that he just likes to collect as a weird history nerd. Though it is, again, something that's hard to get behind or defend, the guy liked war stuff, and okay, not great, but there you go. It gets harder to justify the further into heavy and extreme metal you go. Much like how a lot of punk has, at least for a significant chunk of the genre's history, depended on being controversial as part of the whole vibe of the scene, so too has metal relied on shock. And I don't mean the sort of stuff that your dad refers to as shock rock. Just Alice Cooper. No, the early black metal scene's ethos can fairly easily be summed up by a quote from John Waters' Pink Flamingo as, "Kill everyone now! Condone first-degree murder! Advocate cannibalism! Eat shit! Filth are my politics! Filth is my life!" some of the adherents of the Norwegian black metal scene have walked back their comments as attempts to fully embrace being, quote, the most hated band in the world. A title that apparently many of the bands in the scene were vying for by torching churches, murdering gay men, and attacking black people in Scandinavia in the 90s.
Okay, I'm about to do a little bit of a reach here and bring up my horrible godforsaken classics education.
Okay.
One of my favorite arguments I've ever heard was when the French Revolution happened. The Marquis de Sade said that it could only ever truly be a democratic revolution if we abandoned morality as a concept. And I think could there be like a similar thing going on? I've just always thought about that whenever I think about art.
You're giving people too much credit.
Too much credit.
This is it. There are a lot of perspectives about why the Norwegian black metal scene went into that. I think there are some bands that applies to. I think like Gwar, for all of its schlockiness, that applies to. I mean, they formed when they were a bunch of art students, and so there are some bands that applies to. But from everything that I know about it, like the Norwegian black metal scene was really just a bunch of very upset middle class teenagers in a wealthy society that just decided that they wanted to like embrace their weird pagan roots. And we're going to get into that a lot when we start talking about a guy who records as Burzum. But I think, that's a good point. And I think like John Waters, yes.
Yeah.
Abandoning morality to make art is very much his thing, and turning that into commentary about society and like everything with Divine is a very hard thing to watch. Yeah. It's all like fun, but it's also I turned on Pink Flamingos one day. It was like, it was like Saturday morning and I had nothing planned. I was like, just to throw this on. And like the first scene with the woman in the crib in her underwear screeching about eggs, I was like, no, this is
can't do
it. not today.
So they're not like flirting with that Marquis du Sade, John Waters, Eric Andre line.
Some of them are, but I think that's more of a modern thing. And I don't think that applies to the early true Norwegian black metal scene with like Mayhem and Emperor and bands like that. But I would be happy to entertain arguments to the contrary, because I think that's like an interesting argument. And I would like to think that these guys were not all just pure fucking evil. And I mean, there are indications that at least some of them were not, and some of them were doing that. But it's like when you're at a party and people start killing each other and you don't stop it, then you're kind of culpable.
Yeah.
It happens to me all the time.
Yeah.
I'm a coward. I don't stop them.
That's all that Redacted is. It's just
that's all that Redacted
each other at parties.
Yeah, anytime. It's like the reverse of a minion in Judaism, where if there are 10 or more people together, you have to start murdering each other.
Yeah.
It's bad, but it keeps the rent real low.
Redacted, famous for low rent as well.
Yes, exactly. So yeah, I mean, to that point, like the most hated band in the world line, you can attribute that to several different bands, and my read is that it's not art that they're going for. It's that they were just trying to outdo each other in this scene of angry teenagers. So they burned some churches, they murdered people, they attacked others. With all of that, it is really damn hard to get past all of that, and their typically liberal use of the N-word, vitriolic anti-Semitic statements, and still touring bands like Dark Throne printing stuff like the following on their album covers. Quote, "If any man should attempt to criticize this LP, he should be thoroughly patronized for his obviously Jewish behavior." Now, it should be noted that the member of Dark Throne who put that on the LP has since recanted and is, by all accounts, a stand-up individual who is a profoundly stupid edgelord in his teenage years. So modern-day Dark Throne, probably not Nazis. Now,
but they did award criticism to the Jews.
They did.
So congrats. All criticism is now
that's us.
The purview of Jewish people.
We created criticism. There's a joke floating around on Twitter a while ago that I liked a lot that was talking about conspiracy theories about the Talmud. And it was like, people who have these conspiracy theories about the Talmud don't realize that it's just a bunch of rabbis arguing over centuries because one guy centuries back insulted another guy's rooster. And from there came rabbinic Judaism. This is why I find it hard to find a good synagogue in Redacted. Anyway, so with all of that in mind, it's not particularly difficult to understand why extreme metal, an umbrella term that is typically used to refer to metal subgenres that diverge from popular music theory, like the pop structures we were talking about earlier, and typically use screaming or growling vocals. It's not particularly difficult to understand why all of this is at risk of attracting the Nazi crowd. It is, by and large, very aggressive music. Its early developers at least flirted with extreme right-wing ideology. There are ties to esoteric mysticism, frequently tied to the more fringe elements of white nationalism, courtesy of Black Sabbath's all-pervading influence of metal. It violently rejects the mainstream and everything from aesthetics to sound. And lastly, by being so exclusionary by bent of embracing all of the above, extreme metal has an overwhelmingly white audience. Further, you may recall that we briefly talked about metal festivals in our MMA episode. Do you remember how that was used as a recruiting tool for a lot of these festivals? How these festivals that are, MMA and white power have metal concerts? Well, that's important to keep in mind because this stuff works like a virus. No one starts off throwing out a Sig Heil as their first words. Instead, people are chipped away at by surrounding forces. It may be edgy humor gone too far. It might be your truly basement-dwelling guildmate on World of Warcraft. It might be a measured-sounding YouTuber talking about cultural Marxism. It might be that cool-sounding band that has some questionable lyrics, but hey, no one's perfect all the time, right? Slowly, you find yourself more and more ingrained in these circles until sometimes by the time you realize what's happening, it's too late. Music is an incredibly effective recruiting tool for any political persuasion. Consider Rage Against the Machine. Whomst among us on the left did not get their start listening to Rage Against the Machine? Whomst among us doesn't look at Paul Ryan saying he loves Rage Against the Machine and scoff? Music is one of those things that is so baseline human that it's impossible, almost impossible, to not be into. I've met people who are not into music. They listen to static, and it is deeply disturbing to me.
That is odd. That's some like real horror movie shit.
It is. By using music to send a message, you tap into a primal part of every person. It's that primal messaging, how movements use music and lyrics and their broader posturing as bands that we'll get to in part 2 of this little series. We'll be touching on the Norwegian black metal scene as typified by Varg Vikernes, looking at the rise of apolitical music and what that is, how that is, nearly without fail, a dog whistle for Nazis, and wondering why, again, it is that these motherfuckers love the same kind of music that I do. Then we'll take a look at what movements exist to counter these sons of bitches. But first, I'm going to give you a couple of quotes. The first comes from a statement that the relatively mainstream metal band Sodom put out to defend their choice to play a festival in Finland that is absolutely riddled with Nazi bands. And again, I want you to remember that they put this out to defend their choice to play alongside Nazis. So, Robert, I hope you're going to take notes here because there's a lot in here, and you're gonna have a tally going. So to quote the statement, "Hey pals, to get it right up front, once again we distance ourselves from bands that abuse their musical platform to express their political views, rather whether right or left, to the outside world. But we that get worse. But we stand for freedom of expression for everyone, and we won't let that talk us to death. When the Steelfest promoter booked the show with us at the end of 2019, these supporting acts, the Nazis, and the billing, I guess just refers to who was on the flyer with them, we're not even up for discussion. So we have a valid guest performance contract. We are currently clarifying the legal situation. We generally perform on behalf of ourselves and our fans, and not for the other bands. The politically correct bands, whatever that means, are in the majority at Steelfest. Will they cancel their performances? We will definitely talk to the organizer again about the situation, and we'll form our own judgment. We can't always please everyone, and we don't want that at all. But if we have to bow to some kind of political pressure every time, then we artists and musicians can soon quit our jobs. And after 40 years in this exciting business, I don't need any instructions about what to do or not. We have a strong fan base in Finland, and many are happy to see Sodom again after receiving a special setlist exclusively. After this long, dry spell, we are, of course, happy to be playing in Finland again. This is our job, our passion. That's what we are living for. We won't let that talk us to death either, and decide for ourselves. That is what they wrote.
That's a sentence.
That is a sentence. Yep. We will, of course, keep you up to date on the current state of affairs, but don't forget, Sodom stands for freedom, peace, justice, and democracy. And that's all that counts. Cheers. So I lost track of how many groans I got from you on that one. It's in the double digits, I think.
Well, listen here, Aaron. I'm really moved by their argument that at least 51% of the other bands think Jews are people. I thought that was a really great point by them.
Really, political theorists. Sodom. Right
yeah.
Now, I'll say this whole thing had me deeply worried. Not because I like Sodom. I don't. They're fine, I guess. But another band I really like called Havu Krunu, which is like one of the weirdest black metal bands because they sound more like, fun power metal than anything else. We're also playing this show. And I was like, oh God, are they Nazis? And it took them a little bit, but they put out a statement that was like, we're withdrawing from this festival because there are Nazis there. We didn't know that there were Nazis there. This sucks for us because we wanted to play and we had a contract, but yeah. So they're also signed to a label that has a strict no Nazi policy. So good on them. But we're so keep that whole statement in mind, because in part 2 we're going to go into that whole apolitical thing that Sodom we're trying to get into and why that's problematic. But so like what do you think? Are you now a fan of peace and justice loving band Sodom?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Would you call yourself a sodomite? Thank you. If their fans don't call themselves sodomites, they're really missing out.
Tragic misbranding, if the case.
Yeah.
Just like, oh God. It's just like, why? So you have one group of people who's like, we're going to beat the shit out of you and murder you. And you have another group of people who's like, please don't let them do that. And then you're like, who could say, let's let them all talk about it.
Yeah. It's a fun one. And every time you see this crop up in cultural circles, you should start getting concerned about what kind of stuff you're supporting with your money or your time.
Yeah, and there's like an inevitability to that approach that is, I remember like 4 or 5 years ago when he first got the podcast, I was talking to all my friends and I was like, Joe Rogan is gonna destroy America. And they were like, there's no way the Fear Factor guy is gonna ruin media. And I was like, yes, he will. He just takes anyone on his show and he has no opinion, and it's gonna be horrible.
Yep.
And like there's like a gravity well on the far right that just pulls in all people who aren't trying to swim against the stream. And like, if you play at a bunch of Nazi festivals, you become a Nazi eventually.
Yeah, it's bad. So there's another quote I want to get to before we wrap up. Dan, it's going to get into a little bit of a similar thing. This comes from an article on the site, The Toilet of Hell. And
now that is great branding.
That's great branding. And the word of is spelled with a V, so you know it's metal. The article gives a recap of a whole slew of articles expressing shock that the members of the band Slayer, whose fans have a disturbingly Nazi-adjacent merch fetish and are best known for doing coke in a stadium bathroom before going out and trying to kill each other in a mosh pit, are Trump supporters. Quote, "The news came in breathless from every major music outlet across the earth. Tom Araya posted a poorly photoshopped image of Donald Trump onto an ancient Slayer promo pic to Instagram, accidentally deleted it because he's an old person who is not good at computers, denigrated snowflakes for taking offense to the image, left a shitty homophobic joke, and then the band attempted to walk back the whole thing with a non-apology. Go back to 1994 and listen to Slayer's Divine Intervention. Track 4 is a little ditty called Ditto Head, a tribute to Kerry King's perceived lack of justice in America. For those unfamiliar, Ditto Head was a slang term briefly used in the 90s to describe fans of extreme right-wing radio show host Rush Limbaugh. Slayer dropped Undisputed Attitude, a collection of cover songs. Included was a cover of Minor Threat's Guilty of Being White, a song Ian MacKaye wrote as a teenager about being on the receiving end of a racially motivated ass beating. Slayer's cover changed the lyrics on the last chorus from guilty of being white to guilty of being right, which kind of just takes a big old shit in the punch bowl for the song's original intent.
Oh.
The band explained that they thought racism was ridiculous at the time.
We asked these 4 white guys.
For decades, Slayer have printed the iconography of Nazi German Wehrmacht on every scrap of their merchandise to market their brand with a ruthlessness that rivals the masters of selling out, Kiss. Gene Simmons of Kiss is a big old shithead. Just saying that. Motherfucking shithead who is really a big fan of suing people, so we'll see what happens. So now the Slayer thing is important because, well, they're Slayer and they're massive. The iconography, right-wing beliefs, all of that play into an embrace of a genre that is aggressively countercultural, aggressively loud, and unlike punk, still has a big fucking hill to climb with addressing this stuff. So my question to you is, have I scared you away from listening to metal yet?
I mean, not baby metal.
No, baby metal is terrible.
The only pure genre of metal.
No, baby metal is the... Oh, God. That... Oh! Baby metal, for those of you who don't know, is a band that marries death metal with J-pop. And I hate it.
I think we were talking on Signal one time and you mentioned the baby metal and I was like, what is that? And you
No, because you texted me and you were like, is baby metal Antifa or something like that? Because apparently
it was trending on Twitter.
Yeah, like the feds were asking if that or something.
Yep.
And I was in a metal bar in Kyoto a couple of years ago, and it was a very small place. The owner was a really friendly dude who let me put on Mastodon for a couple hours. And when I got in there, I was like, "Hey, what kind of bands should I check out from Japan?" So he gave me a list, and then I was like, "What do you think about baby metal?" And he just gave me these big 2 thumbs down with the look that he just ate like a really bad sour lemon.
Baby metal's never hurt anyone, Aaron.
It's just
the only genre of metal. I'm sure there's no Nazis in baby metal.
It's probably true. That is probably true.
That's your
Instead of listening to baby metal, go listen to Galnerius. Galnerius is awesome, and they're also Japanese.
That's a pivot you can make. I'm just saying.
It is.
You can make the pivot into something Nazi free, a whole music genre.
A whole music genre consisting of one band, which is really, when you get down to it, the most metal thing you could do.
Nope. I Googled it.
What? Would you? Oh no. What? Are they Nazis?
They just use a bunch of Nazi imagery.
Okay. Well,
Which is not.
There you go. Everything gets ruined.
Everything gets ruined.
Uh-huh.
Back to the theme of the episode and really the whole show. If you ever Google anything, stop.
Cut off your internet.
Yep.
Read nothing but
Peter Kropotkin, the only
Yep, there we go.
The true holy man.
Everyone else is a lib.
Yeah, everyone is a lib but Kropotkin. He'd have made some great metal music. Big old
I
beard.
wonder what that would have been like
from Russia.
Yeah. Dostoevsky themed metal.
Oh my God.
There you go.
Those guys really were born generations too early.
Absolutely.
That was their calling. They're also fucking edgy, and they love writing things that are at minimum 1,000 words too long. They would have just fucking loved to pump out 22-minute songs about nothing into the Russian winter.
Fyodor Dostoevsky, everyone's favorite sludge metal.
Yes. Would have been fucking awesome.
Yep.
And I would have never had to read Brothers K in college.
Well, it would have just been a concept album.
Yeah.
It would have been Mastodon's Crack the Sky, except like toned down a couple of octaves and about 3 times as long.
Now, I think that would, if all those like sad Russian men, if like Chekhov had just been a metal musician, I could have liked him.
Yeah.
If I just got like really high in a dorm room and someone put it on, it would actually be enjoyable.
Yeah.
Instead of the rest of Chekhov. I found out the other day that the Iowa Writers Workshop was started by the FBI.
You what?
It was started by the FBI.
I did not know that.
Yep, and it made so much sense to me about like all those writing MFA programs that so there was like an influx of like Russian and European literature in America at the time.
Yeah.
And they were like, this is all some commie foreign shit. These people aren't even white. They're from Hungary. So,
oh, like my family. Yeah,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
These are Slavs. And so they started the Iowa Writers Workshop using a former like high up in the FBI who was the first dean of the school.
Shit. I did not know that.
Trying to create like a uniquely American form of literary fiction.
They chose the right place for it.
Yes, they did.
Yeah. I'm amazed that Vonnegut taught there.
Did he really? Yeah.
Taught there for not a long time, I don't think, but he taught there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Woof.
Yeah. They started it as a propaganda move.
That's fucking insane. God, that explains so much about American literary fiction, though.
It made so much, like, all clicked into place for me after that.
I just took the red pill.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
This was the same period of time when they were literally following Ernest Hemingway and plotting to kill him.
The classic FBI, not the watered down garbage we have today.
No.
Fuck.
You've heard that story about Hemingway, right?
I think I've heard like the Cliff Notes version.
Oh, yeah. He kept telling people he was being followed by the government, and everyone thought he was crazy, and then he was being followed by the government.
Wow.
Fucking insane. Yep. So the FBI's roots in modern American literary fiction. They created all of it.
That makes so much fucking sense.
Yep.
I only wish that I could do a better job of keeping a straight face when writing sad New England literature now.
Yeah.
I can't. I'm like 25 pages in and trying to fight the urge to just bring in the Woods Wizard.
That's because you can feel the influence of J. Edgar Hoover and it's rotting your soul from the inside out.
Oy. Jonathan Franzen makes so much sense now.
Yeah.
Just that dull-minded son of a bitch. I don't understand Jonathan Franzen. Just NPR literature. It's just like the years ago, I heard a segment about like how they were talking in hushed tones about the very difficult process of making olive oil.
Yeah.
And how it brings out really the lush flavors depending on where the olives come. And I heard this, and I was in my friend's car, and he just kept turning up the volume to torture me. And it sticks in my head now, like 10 years after the fact. I just think of that. And it's just that Jonathan Franzen, Margaret Atwood, who people like because of the TV series, but they've never read her writing because it's boring as shit.
Well, that was in my head when you in the last episode talked about people who listen to TV static being bizarre. In my head, I was like, well, it's still better than NPR.
Yeah, there was one morning. I get up very early, and I get up early to do my writing about woods wizards and the like. And I was eating breakfast, and there was I put it on the local NPR station, and there was a story about, I think it was qualified immunity, and it's like just them outlining why it's a problem, and then they cut to a fucking ad for like, isn't it terrible? Like for the what's wait don't tell me bullshit show.
Oh hell yeah!
Isn't it terrible when you step on your dog's tail? I'm like, damn it, you gotta go from like very important shit to just that, and I'm like, and that's why I never that's the last time I've listened to NPR. I just listen to the jazz station now. And you know what else I listen to?
Metal music.
My
My last NPR tirade is, if you want to stop anyone from playing NPR in a car near you, I can guarantee this works because I do it myself.
Good.
The people who are talking like this in that very soothing sort of NPR voice, you look at the person who put NPR on the radio, and you start doing dirty talk in this NPR voice, mimicking both of the people who are talking. If you just say the nastiest shit in the whole world in this sort of smooth radio sound,
that goes right off.
Yeah, people will change it every time.
So that listeners, that's the takeaway.
Yeah, that's my helpful tip.
Yeah, if you take one thing away from our entire series, that's it.
Yeah.
That's good. That's good.
But metal music.
When we last left off, I gave you and our listeners a big old info dump about metal's history and hinted at why the genre is sadly a breeding ground for Nazis' reprehensible ideologies, despite being filled with nerds, queer folk, and people who insist that they're apolitical. Does that last one strike a nerve with you?
Every time.
Yeah.
I have followed Ted Wheeler on Twitter.
The claims that someone's apolitical. Wait, hold on. Ted Wheeler has said that he's apolitical?
I think he said that policing is apolitical at one point.
Fuck off. That's stupid as shit. That motherfucker, that bastard. Jesus. God damn it. So that's a dog whistle.
Yeah.
You know what happens with dog whistles? It's a word that makes me apparently sit very close to my webcam and just laying out expletives, scaring my dog who goes into his crate. Does that remind you of people like Ted Wheeler or Sam Harris or Joe Rogan, Jordan Balthazar Peterson, literal Nazi war criminal Werner von Braun? Well, that's because you're a person like me who has a finely tuned radar for Nazi shit. To know why a host of miscreants claim to be apolitical, we have to go to certified rat bastard Julius Evola. I rediscovered Evola through an article published by a guy whose name I am going to slaughter, and I apologize. I think it's Anton Shkovstov.
He's your fault. If he had planned correctly, he wouldn't have that many consonants in his name.
It's a lot of consonants, and it's not in the way that I'm familiar with. They're all front loaded. So he's a policy expert focusing on European right-wing movements. The article that I'm referring to is titled Apolitic Music, Neo-Folk, Martial Industrial, and Metapolitical Fascism. It is focused on, as the label says, neo-folk and martial industrial music. Think whispery guitars with maybe some synth for neo-folk. And then for martial industrial music, think right-wing Rammstein. Despite not being explicitly focused on metal, the article has a lot of lessons that apply. To wit, he says of Evola writes that a fascist should practice disinterest, detachment from everything that today constitutes politics, and this was exactly the principle that Evola called apolitia. While apolitia does not necessarily imply abstention from socio-political activities, an apolitic individual, a quote, aristocrat of the soul, to cite the subtitle of the English translation of Cavalcare le Tigre, should always embody his, quote, irrevocable internal distance from this modern society and its values.
Yeah, I'm just apolitical. I'm not left or right. I'm just like looking for some, let's call it a third way.
Exactly. That's what we're trying to find is a third way.
Beyond modern politics.
Yeah, a final solution to these questions. That's what we're looking for. In other words, Evola is saying that a fascist should break away from modernity, hold himself, and it is always nearly a him above modernity, and not debase himself by taking part in party politics, but he should still advocate for upending society. A good fascist, after all, believes in action for action's sake, and ultimately that boils down to power. Thus, apoliticalness, especially as it ties to music, is an attempt to gain a foothold in culture, or as Shkhovstov puts it, metapolitical fascism focuses almost exclusively on the battle from hearts and minds rather than for immediate political power. Think for a moment about everything we've been talking about in this podcast. The need for these groups to gain a foothold in culture in whatever way possible, through Fight Club, through co-opting martial arts, through appealing to religious sensibilities. Fascist theorizers from the very start have known that political struggle is a struggle of propaganda and getting people to your side. Their view is one of violence, of strength, and of power. Is it any surprise, then, that the extreme right chooses to go after the forms of media that it does? But going back to Shkhovstov, he writes in continuing to describe the aesthetics of the apolitical fascist music labels, they abandon overt fascist ultranationalism in the name of a Europe restored to the essentially mythic homogeneity of its component primordial cultures. We'll get into this heavily when we discuss one of the guys who really brought this mentality to the forefront. But before we do, we have to tie that back to fascism. Shkhovstov does the work for us. He points to another fascist writer, Ernst Jünger, who in a series of books argues that Europe must retreat into the forest. This does not mean becoming Luddites. Rather, it means returning to Shkhovstov's essentially mythic homogeneity of its component primordial cultures. And that element right there brings us to National Socialist black metal and the guy who I think is one of the fellas chiefly responsible for its spread. Varg Vikernes, best known as Burzum. I'm going to break here from my script for a moment, and I'm going to suggest that you and our listeners watch a movie called Lords of Chaos. It's relatively recent, and it's about the band Mayhem, from which Vikernes kind of gained notoriety. It stars, I can't remember his name, but Macaulay Culkin's brother, and it's it's all right, but it's a as fun as it can be, a fun introduction to the scene, and kind of gets you into learning about this, and then you can kind of jump into other things like that Vice interview with Gall that I talked about in the first episode here. But Varg Vikernes was born as Christian Vikernes in 1973 in Bergen, Norway. His parents were engineers and oil company employees, and for a bit they lived in Iraq. There,
they were oil company employees in Iraq.
Oh yeah,
So whatever he did, he's still going to be a better person than either of his parents.
Yeah, that is true.
In terms of total body count, he will have done less damage.
Although I think you can, I think the damage to a lot of impressionable minds that NSBM, National Socialist Black Metal, has done is pretty goddamn bad. And Vikernes is still very much active in the vlogosphere.
So he one day may kill 600,000 people in Iraq in the space of 20 years.
Yeah, this is it's bad. I think his parents were his dad at least was worse for a different reason that we'll get to in a moment here. So they lived in Iraq. There, Vikernes claimed to, quote, become aware of racial matters when he hurled slurs at teachers and fellow students. And he also notes that he was lonely. Strange, right? Isn't that strange?
What a weird coincidence.
Yeah, it's weird. After returning to Bergen, Vikernes, and a lot of this comes from interviews with him, and he is a very self-aggrandizing and I argue not trustworthy at all. He claims that his father had a swastika flag in their flat and hated minorities, but he was worried that his son would grow up to become a Nazi. So Vikernes may or may not have been involved in neo-Nazi groups, but claims that there were no neo-Nazis in Bergen. This is unlikely because Scandinavia has a huge Nazi problem. And, broadly speaking, when someone claims there are no blank, they're covering up the fact that there are a ton of blanks. So, I think it's a something to note that the guy's argument for, well, I couldn't have been a neo-Nazi because there were no neo-Nazis, is not a compelling argument.
No, it's very similar to that PragerU thing of like, no one's in the Klan anymore.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, it's almost like they get the same talking points across the board.
Yeah.
Real strange. Yeah. Real weird. Real weird. So anyway, he got into music. He found black metal courtesy of Venom's black metal album. He does claim to dislike Venom. He expresses regret that he ever wore their shirts, which may be the dumbest, most posturing metalhead regret in the world. Once in that scene, he did what any good metalhead teenager would do. He picked up a guitar and started projects. He started his career with the band Old Funeral, then started a one-man project called Burzum, and then played guitar on a couple of Mayhem albums. During his time in the Norwegian black metal scene, Vikernes set fire to culturally important churches and then stabbed Mayhem's leader, Euronymous, 23 times to death outside his flat.
Holy shit.
Yeah, it was bad. There's that Lords of Chaos film goes into it, like why it happened a little more, and it's probably not the best source out there, but like the crux of the matter is there was an argument, shall we say, between the two of them about royalties, and so Vikernes stabbed the guy to death. He claims that he was acting in defense because Euronymous said that he was going to kill Vikernes, so really it was in self-defense. But yeah, I think like once you stab someone 23 times, it's probably not self-defense and just rage.
You get 5 stabs or less.
You get self-defense 5 stabs or less. Yeah, after that, no, that's murder.
Once your stabbing takes like an amount of time where people could like watch you stab a guy, be like, wow, he's really stabbing that guy, lose their shock, and then be shocked again that you're still stabbing the guy. That's when it's no longer self-defense.
Exactly. And, I think it goes to what we talked about in the first episode of Gaul bleeding a man for 8 days. At a certain point, that ceases to become self-defense.
I kidnapped and bled that man in my apartment for self-defense.
Yeah. So... that's again, as we said in that first episode, it's like that John Waters line, condone first degree murder, advocate eat shit, advocate cannibalism. Same thing. Yeah. So during his time in that, he did all that stuff, and then following the murder, He served time in prison. Following that, Vikernes became a vlogger under the YouTube channel name Thulian Perspective. He married a French woman, moved to France, created a tabletop role-playing game, and occasionally puts out music today.
Created a tabletop role-playing game?
Yes, it's called Mythic Fantasy Role-Playing Game, I think.
That's a horrible name.
Yeah, he strikes me as one of those nerds who's like, D&D 5th edition just streamlines everything too much. The only true role-playing game is Pathfinder 1st edition. I need to do rolls for each individual arrow to see how much damage they do. He would not be a fan of the 2d20 Dune system that we're playing.
No,
he would hate that.
He seems like one of those people who rants on Twitter about the fact that the races in D&D are definitely different and you can't change that. Which was a glorious discussion I witnessed on far right Twitter one time.
Oh no. All right, we're gonna put the metal on pause. You're gonna tell me about this.
So like I forget, Wizards of the Coast or something came out and were like, so races, like we get that, like saying there are different races in this world that are all like different with different innate characteristics might be like a little problematic. And that was pretty much it. And right-wing Twitter lost their fucking mind.
So Vikernes is a huge tweeter.
Nice. So I bet he had an opinion.
I am sure he is like, in mythic fantasy role-playing, this is not an issue. The only thing you can be is true pagan.
Don't take away my hobbits.
Yeah, don't you take away my halflings. There's a cool like take on that whole thing that a friend of mine sent me a while ago. That's like you choose a culture and an ancestry, and it tries to minimize all of that mishigas as much as it can. It's pretty cool. So you can have like a tiefling who grew up around dwarves, so you get benefits from the dwarves, and
that's cool.
Yeah. But yeah, that whole, it's one of the reasons I don't really like fantasy stuff, because they really lean heavy on races instead of just calling them species. Like you get in like sci-fi games, like, yeah, if you want to be like the rat species in, what is it? Starfinder, I think. Then it's a distinct thing, and they're different. They're species.
Well, Aaron, if we don't really hammer on races, how are we going to have nebulously evil men from the East?
That's true. We need to be worried about the Easterlings, and the men of Numenor, who are, by virtue of the pallor and swarthiness of their skins, evil.
Good Lord. Oh, why are those books so good when he was such a absurdly Anglo-fascist dude?
Well, this is now a podcast where we talk about tabletop role-playing games.
The inevitable pivot into either a true crime podcast like last episode or a tabletop role-playing game podcast in this episode. The only two true genres.
Exactly. Everything else just falls by the wayside.
Yep.
Ah, boy. Anyway, in addition to all that stuff, Vikernes, who we're talking about, he also was the opinion that Anders Breivik, the guy who did a mass murder, did not go far enough, and that he was a Christian loser.
Oh, good Lord!
Yeah, Vikernes currently goes by Louis Cachet. In addition to all of that, Vikernes is a big old believer in that return to the forest thing that Younger wrote about. For Vikernes, that means embracing, quote, paganism. Robert, are you ready to learn about Vikernes' thoughts on what paganism means?
I'm sure it's going to be life-changing.
Are you stoked to learn how that ties back to Evola's essentially mythic homogeneity of the component primordial cultures?
Yep, I'm very excited to become a pagan in the next 30 seconds.
So glad that you said that. And for what it's worth, I am going to a pagan festival tomorrow night to I don't know how it's pronounced, Samhain, I think. So that's going to be fun. I'm looking forward to that.
You're going to return to the forest tomorrow night?
I'm going to return to the forest tomorrow night. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. So, hey, we got quotes. So another thing, this is Vikernes writing in his blog. Another thing that is probably I'm going to try to do a little bit of a voice for him I feel like Norwegians are a group that we can mock.
Yeah.
I'm going to go with it. Another thing that is probably a problem to these dirty, filthy, ganja-smoking, free-love hippies who call themselves pagans and also claim to perform pagan rites is that white also means innocent. The ancient pagans claimed that that one should not bring anything impure to the Veard. And Veard is a nebulously defined term that you get from like Old Norse myth. From what I know, Veard just kind of means like the general community or like the sense of human brotherhood kind of thing. But that's not what it means to Nazis. Impure into the Veard. So only virgins and married women who have never been with any other men than their husbands were allowed to practice the customs. Further, only women and men with fair eyes, it est blue, green, or green eyes, were allowed to enter the hall of the Odin. This is not something I just make up because I am a, quote, vile racist. It is something very clearly in the Norse mythology that only people of Jarl's kin are allowed to enter Valhalla, the hall of Odin.
What a loser.
You can, however, easily be a pagan with brown eyes or a pagan who is not innocent, but if so, you cannot practice the customs or sing magic songs in this life. And this only makes up a small part of paganism anyhow. Therefore, you simply have to wait until the next life before you can live up to the required moral and genetic standards. Maybe you will not live up to these standards until the life after the next life. Even if some Europeans are a bit polluted genetically, so to speak, and have brown eyes, for instance, that is something that can be solved by a few generations of race hygiene.
Oh my God, race hygiene?
Race hygiene. I am not only talking about Scandinavia and the Scandinavian people, or only about the Scandinavian version of the ancient religion. All Europeans, and I'm kind of consolidating a couple of rambling paragraphs here. All Europeans from Scotland to Greece are all European Aboriginals of Jarl's kin, and we all once practiced this ancient religion.
Has he seen Greek people?
Well, probably not. I think his thing would be that they are polluted genetically and were not the way that they were at the start. That would be my guess without having looked at that question from Vikernes' point of view, because there's only so much liquor in the world.
There's so many yikes in that paragraph.
There's so many yikes. And if memory recalls, our friend Curran is up on like the Edos and that kind of stuff. So I would be interested in what he has to say on this. And like I did a little bit of reading. We'll get into that. Hold on. Getting ahead of myself. Yeah, so many yikes in that paragraph. And I think it is astounding in a lot of different ways. It all ties back to the Reich. We'll get to that in a bit. But it's wonderful because the Vikings, they had their thing. But one of the great things about the Vikings was they did not care. And they were like, if you can swing a sword or row a boat, then we'll take you in, probably as a slave. But hey, you might get out of that status. And there's a great book that I like and recommend to everyone called The Long Ships. And it's a Swedish book from the 50s about a guy named Orm who gets captured by Vikings and rises to become a Jarl in his own right. But it shows like how wide these guys are ranged. So like a chunk of the book takes place in I guess it would be Portugal today, but it was under the Caliphate, and talks about like how mobile these guys were and how much interaction they had and like the makeups of their crews. And it was not the pure race. It was not the kin of Jarl.
Good Lord. You can just you created a tabletop RPG. You can just play a tabletop RPG, dude. Like, just get together with your friends on Friday nights and sing the magic songs. Like, it doesn't have to be more than that, you weirdo. Oh, God.
I love that. The sing the magic songs. I think that's what whenever I'm talking to a rabbi next, I'll say like, "Hey, maybe could we change the name of what we call prayers to magic songs?
Yeah,
that would spice up Yom Kippur services a bit more."
so I've got a branding idea for for this whole Old Testament thing.
It's like furiously pounding a bottle of Jack Daniels, just like, I got an idea.
Furiously pounding a whole bottle of Menashev.
Yes, there you go. That's much better. Oh, and just dying immediately from sugar overdose. So that was a lot.
Yep.
What he's doing there is a few different things. One, he's tying the idea of Valhalla to purity and whiteness. Two, he's outright tying that to living up to genetic standards. And three, he's attempting to pull off the idea that there was an paganism, a single religion from which the Norse, Greek, Celtic, and Slavic pagan religions came from. Now, I don't claim to be an expert, but I do apply what I call the David Letterman test to this. The David Letterman test is when I'm not an expert, but I know enough to know that the guy talking is slinging bullshit to try and make a political point. The basis from which we can assume this is wrong is that while it is possible, maybe even probable, that all of these faiths came from a single source, that source was likely an Indo-European source with its roots in the original peoples who migrated into Europe in that great course of human migrations. Chances are these people were not white, unless you want to stretch the bounds of what white is, but doing that is not exactly pure. When it comes to the whole Odinism thing, I'm not sure, and I guess the proper word is asatru. I've read the Eddas, but it's been a long time. I recall a lot of the Eddas being focused on the exploits of the gods amongst themselves and against the giants, elves, and dark elves, but not so much dealing with humans aside from a few things here and there, like finding people in a tree and them being in the tree during Ragnarok. I certainly did not walk away from reading the Eddas with a drive to join a bunch of Nazis. What reading the Eddas gave me instead was a deep appreciation for the bands Amon Amarth and Tyr. Now, do you care to guess where this attempt to tie purity and whiteness to the Vikings comes from?
Oh, God. It's got to be like that early Anthroposophist thing.
More directly, it's the Third Reich.
Oh, nice.
It's the Nazis. It's always the Nazis.
It's like those early Nazis, the pre-long knives Nazis.
Yeah, the weird occult dudes.
The Nazis before they sold out and went mainstream.
Exactly. The occult guys that, like, even after the Night of Long Knives, Hitler just kind of tried to shove into a warehouse like the Ark of the Covenant. Just be like, put them in a box. Yep. They're too weird even for us. So there's a lot of literature about there, and maybe we'll go into it in more detail, but it's the Nazis, those occult-obsessed, well-dressed rune enthusiasts. But let's not allow ourselves to get sidetracked by talking about runes. No, we're going to talk about something equally batshit, which Vikernes is also a big fan of. Thule.
Hell yeah.
Do you know what Thule is?
Fuck yes, I do.
Tell us what Thule is.
As I understand, it's like this weird, essentially mystical grift. I know more about. We're talking about like the Tula Society.
Yeah, I guess it's Tula. Yeah. I say Thule because fuck them.
It sounds way cooler. Cool. It sounds like something from Zardoz to say Thule. And they'd have hated Zardoz. So.
They would have hated Zardoz. Oh yeah,
because they have no soul.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's a great account by one of the early Nazis of like seeing the farty mess that Hitler was giving a speech in a beer hall and thinking he was like this white messiah as predicted by the Thule Society manuscripts.
So it's named after a place. The Tula Society. For a lot of the esoteric fascists out there, the ones who are the real rune enthusiasts, it is the homeland of the Aryans. They also call it Hyperborea. Now, that should sound familiar if you're a fan of Conan the Barbarian. Conan the Barbarian, of course, written by a man whose racial ideas were, shall we say, problematic. Are
you going to take Conan from me right now?
Dude, the original Edgar Rice Burroughs.
He wrote Conan?
Yeah. Yeah. Let me fact check myself here. Yeah, Robert E. Howard, not Burroughs. Sorry, Robert E. Howard, not Burroughs. The guys with the three names always confuse me. Robert E. Howard was the guy who wrote Conan the Barbarian. He was a big friend of Lovecraft.
Oh,
and,
nice. Yeah,
they got along. Yeah, they got along partly because of the whole racist stuff. But yeah, he shortened the name to Hyboria, I think. So if you watch Conan the Barbarian, the original one, not the one with Jason Momoa, which you should never watch because that will drive you mad. It starts off with like a Conan from the land of Hyboria in the Hyborian era kind of thing. So it's a shortening of Hyperborea. Boy. Anyway, so that term comes from Greek and Roman historians who were, as we all know, the most accurate and discerning of human beings. In order to join the Nazis' Tula Society, folks had to sign a statement reading, "The signer hereby swears to the best of his knowledge and belief that no Jewish or colored blood flows in either his or in his wife's veins, and that among their ancestors are no members of the colored races."
Good Lord.
Without going into more details, it's basically Wolfenstein. General Deathshead would have been all about the Tula Society, and he probably was. Well, where this comes into play with what we're talking about is A, the fixation of the esoteric Nazi movement on this mythical homeland. B, the idea of a purity-driven movement. C, Vikernes' continued use of Thule and Tula in his blogs, YouTube channels, tabletop role-playing games, which again is called Mythic Fantasy Role-Playing Game. D, the absurd amount of runes and metal. And E, it is so exhausting knowing about all of this stuff. I wish I could be a normal human being who did not know this stuff.
Tune into our podcast next week where we start playing Mythic Fantasy Role-Playing Game every week.
I kind of want to. Like, I'm curious as to how this thing plays, you know? Like, I don't want to buy it, obviously.
Well, Aaron and I try to create the master race.
If you play anyone who is not like Norse, you have a significant disadvantage.
Yeah, disadvantage on all attack rolls for being Jewish.
Disadvantage to attack, knowledge, that charisma, anything like that. So anyway, this is about metal. This is not a biography of Vikernes. We're not going to go into his odd ideas about COVID, him calling Anders Breivik a loser Christian, or any of that other stuff. We are, though, going to talk about Burzum and the metal scene. If you go into a metal record store that has a decent metal collection, you're going to see a Burzum record or two. If you saw The Color Out of Space with Nick Cage, you've heard Burzum.
What?
It's in that movie. His daughter, the kind of gothy chick, is listening to Burzum on her iPad or iPhone or whatever.
Massively underrated movie.
It's fucking fantastic. So, I mean, you know, does that mean that the record store and the director of the film support Vikernes' ideas of racialism? No, probably not. But this is something that has to be struggled with. Broader society runs into this whenever an artist is shown to be a reprehensible human being. But I don't know people who have their head more on a swivel than metalheads trying to suss out the politics of a new band. You see, the genetic makeup of metal is attractive to the right wing. Myth, occult, aggressive music, and an overtly countercultural aesthetic are as much of a draw as punk music. And indeed, punk has its own problem with oi, knuckleheads, and assholes who try to give a Nazi salute on stage at a Dropkick Murphys show before the bassist beats the shit out of them. The trick is that metal often seems to be less willing to confront this stuff, which is a huge bummer. Sure, you have bands like Napalm Death who work their cover of Nazi Punk's Fuck Off into their shows, or Bolt Thrower, who had a long history of getting into brutal drag-out fights with Nazis. But there's an eerie silence in the scene when it comes to calling out far-right leanings. Just consider Sodom's response to fans urging them to cancel their appearance at a festival. Rather than state, yeah, we don't want to play with Nazis because they're fucking Nazis, they chose to complain about politically correct bands and their fans being political. So for every
Hmm.
band with names like Race War, Totenkampf, Final Solution, Jew Slaughter, Legion 88, Conquista 88, or Angry Aryans, those are all real band
Oh
names.
God.
You have more mainstream metal
You-
groups. Yeah.
You've hit me with a few lists of names in this that have just like it's whatever the opposite of pornography is.
Yeah. Those are bad.
Yeah, those are bad.
Very, very bad.
Conquista 88 is both like subtle and bad. Like you wouldn't know if you didn't know.
Well, that followed Legion 88 too. And
Yeah.
that one just sounds like, oh, maybe they're into Star Wars.
Yeah,
But,
that's true.
yeah.
That does sound kind of Star Warsy.
Yeah.
Oh.
No, it's not. It's Nazis.
Yep.
Yeah. So, bad lists. So with every band that's like that, you have more mainstream metal groups that harbor shit like Phil and Anselmo of Pantera throwing up a Nazi salute on stage. This shit is everywhere in the scene, despite people like Gall, the guy who bled someone for 8 days, claiming that metal is the most welcoming community and that it has no prejudices.
That's always the phrase to look out for.
Yeah. We have no one who is judgmental. Everyone is welcoming.
As he's actively hanging a man like a side of beef and bleeding him
Yeah.
into a bucket.
He's such he's a character study. Gall is. He's a gay man who came out like relatively recently,
Wow.
and an artist, and like he's very like a compelling speaker, and he comes across like a guy. Yeah, you don't want to fuck with this guy, but he doesn't seem like a psycho. But then it's like, yeah, he bled a guy for 8 days. So it's strange.
That is odd.
Yeah. So while the metal community is by and large friendly, it has the drawback of being filled with a bunch of nerds. And speaking as a nerd, we are not confrontational people. It takes a lot to break through that barrier, but my fellow metalheads and nerds, I implore you, if you see Nazis, do something. Even if that's just telling your friends that a band is sketch and they shouldn't support them with their time or their money. See, there's a forum on the interwebs, and it's called the Black Vault, where the Nazi metalheads go to play. Their subtitle, you want to guess what their subtitle is?
Oh, God. I'm sure it's so much worse than I can even imagine.
I think you might be surprised.
Really?
Yeah. In one way.
Is it like where everyone's welcome or something?
No.
It's a shame.
It is called, all right, so the subtitle is Hate Preserved.
Oh, God.
Not the angle you thought it was going to be, did you?
Oh, no, that's
Yeah.
horrible, right?
Yeah. I spent some time in January devoting some time going like making a sock puppet account on that site, browsing through. And my goal was to see if I could spot any bands that were like listed on Bandcamp and on there, and then report it to Bandcamp because they're usually good about taking this shit down.
Nice.
And then I quickly abandoned that idea because it's a deep, dark place that is very bad. In that site, you will find threads about how National Socialist black metal releases, poetry critiques, and let's see what else. Surely highbrow discussions about the Israel-Palestine conflict. And what's this? I'm just scrolling through the forum pages, and I see something interesting. What is this? I'm just gonna click, and then I'm gonna tap into my. Yep. Just hold on. I have to speak a command into my computer. Enlarge. Enhance. Yes, it is. It's what I thought. Nazis shitting on Varg for not being Nazi enough.
Hell yeah, the best genre of Nazi discussion.
It is. That's the prime discourse that we all come here for. So all of this leads us into our final section in this bleak trapes. How do we deal with this? In the midst of the threads on the Black Vault, you'll find another topic that keeps popping up called Who is Still Selling? That question should hopefully give you some hope. The unstated fact of that question is that while there will always be Nazis slithering around in the recesses of the scene, there are enough people out there keeping an eye out for them that it becomes hard for those bands to sell on popular storefronts like Bandcamp. Of course, Amazon still lists bands like Screwdriver because they're Amazon, and Amazon exists in a world where morality is a nice to have. Do you know who Screwdriver were?
I do not.
Okay. Screwdriver were a Nazi Oi band. Oi is a subgenre of punk that were really heavy on like English fascism and bad shit, not good. But there was a band in Memphis called Negro Terror, and they were fantastic. The guy Omar was a good dude. Died a few years ago. Rest in peace, Omar. And they did a cover of that song called Voice of Memphis. And I would like to think that the members of Screwdriver are very upset knowing that an all-black punk band in Memphis covered their song.
Nice.
And made it about a city that gets together because of their pride in being a black focused city.
Dang. That's a cool cover.
Yeah, it's a good cover. And like the album's pretty damn solid. And they
Nice.
got a good video that's like shot in a skate park. It's just really cool. So go listen to Negro Terror.
Nice.
Good shit. So that's one way. Starve out the Nazi scene, remove out their oxygen, record sales, and keep them confined to their backwaters, and hopefully they fade away. The catch, though, is that this leads to dog whistles, like fash bands referring to themselves as apolitical, as outlined in Shkovstov's article that we talked about last episode. That is not to say any band that doesn't go into political theory in their songs is a fascist band, but it is something to watch out for. So what do you do, metalheads? Do you renounce the mosh pit and start listening to fucking Beirut or Vampire Weekend or some bullshit? No. Of course not. You check out red anarchist black metal groups, or you listen to bands like Bolt Thrower. You stop listening to racist bands, and you talk to your friends about the scene. Keep an eye out for the knuckleheads among us and be ready to have serious conversations about this thing. Also, burn your Iced Earth records because John Schaefer took part in the January 6th push. Iced Earth is a power thrash metal band that I used to like, and their lead singer was photographed breaking his way into the Capitol building with all the other Nazis.
Nice.
So yeah, I melted those CDs that I still had. To close this out, though, I'd like us to think about two questions. The first is, when does it become impossible to separate the art from the artist? And the second is posed by a French musician named Eric Roger. It's probably Roger, quoted in Shkovstov's piece. It's inspired by a recent kerfuffle involving a black metal festival in Finland that I've talked about before that had a whole slew of Nazi bands signed up to play, and a whole lot of decidedly not Nazi bands also signed up to play. The quote goes like this: "If we, I mean the bands who are against the right-wing ideology, categorically refuse to play at the festivals that feature right-wing bands, do we not give them more space? In this case, our withdrawal would only help them propagate their ideology. Isn't it nonsense? Isn't it better to stay in order to affirm our opposition? But if I say that, isn't it somewhat hypocritical? Isn't it a sort of compromising? Isn't it an excuse we find to accept our tolerance, the same tolerance we loudly condemn in other cases? At the same time, I really and deeply think that it's important that we stay and that we don't leave an empty place to the right-wingers. And that, I think, is a broader topic and one that we've all had to wrestle with in various spaces. So what do? What do?
As I don't know, I am a fan of the self S&M video game League of Legends.
Yeah.
Where you do both a sadism and a masochism on your own brain.
Yeah.
I had this really interesting interaction the other day where we just like crushed this guy, and he hopped in all chat, as people sometimes do on the onlines.
Uh-huh.
And he said, "My team just lost because they're a bunch of SJW cucks." Being a calm and measured soul like I am, I immediately hopped into all chat myself and was like, "I beat you, and I'm an SJW cuck."
Good. And I'm sure this was well received.
Yeah, he proceeded to lose his fucking mind and posted like a straight 50 messages to the whole community about like how he hated the gays and the queers and cancel culture and how he was going to get chat banned for saying the N-word, but he's going to say it anyway. And I think that like this, I've been stuck on that moment because like these people are fucking losers.
Yeah.
And there are so few of them that when actually confronted, like they're the real snowflakes here.
Yeah. And we've seen it time and time again, and it happened recently in Redacted, where there was a fash rally that was planned to be in downtown Redacted, and then the anti-fascist community showed up and they moved their rally to an abandoned Kmart, and then poor choices were made and things escalated. But no, I mean, you're right. Like there are so few of them, and they do back down real quick whenever there is any sort of like numeric, even parity in numbers. But I think one of the things that I thought about a lot when I was working on this is how the punk scene is, by most measures, really good about like stomping the shit out.
Mm-hmm.
And people are much more on the ball with it, like to an absurd point. In a lot of cases where like there's this, apparently it's like floating around TikTok, where like young punks are concerned about lace code. And lace code, if you don't know, is like the color of your laces on Doc Martens says something about who you are. So like if you have a certain color, that means you're a Nazi. And I mean that no one gives a shit about this. Like I don't think it's, from what I know, it has not been a thing outside of LA since the 70s. And it's turned into this fucking stupid bullshit. But it does go to an extent of showing that at least the punk community is willing to like react and say, get the fuck out now.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, you see it in metal with some bands like Bolt Thrower, who are no longer active, but like their lead singer is still doing this stuff. And then Napalm Death and a few others that are overtly anti-fascist. But it's just, yeah, people get sucked into the whole apolitical thing. And I think part of it is metal gets really into deeply nerdy shit. And the real deep nerds among us are like, I just want to go to a show and I don't really want to confront reality. I want to pretend like I'm in a Tolkien land that's dark and gritty, which is fair. But
yeah, I mean, I guess I just wonder to like what extent we can expect people to overcome that feeling. Like, is that a realistic thing?
I think everyone has a breaking point where they can no longer ignore it. It's different for everyone, and I think it was kind of buried in my rambling, but I think it is important for everyone who is like a metal fan to like point out this stuff to their friends. Like I got a buddy who's been out with me at Redacted a couple of times, and he was pointing out, like, he was sending me a link to a new video of a new band that he found. And I was like, this name seems a little sketch. So like I Googled it, and yeah, a couple of them were like Nazis in the band. I was like, sketch band, and he goes, fuck. Like, yeah, dude, sorry, you gotta keep an eye out for this though.
I think that like threshold thing is really interesting because like I think actively working to lower your own threshold is a really important part of all this. Like being willing to go to bat over shit that seems pettier and pettier when it involves Nazism.
Yeah.
Is like hard to do, but also important.
Yeah. And it gets more and more important every day.
Oh, yep.
Yeah.
And I think it goes back to that thing last episode. I think we were talking about like Joe Rogan and how like 4 or 5 years ago, I was like, this is going to be really bad. And everyone was like, you're a fucking asshole. And it's like, you can tell that there's like that little discomfort, and just acting on that immediately as much as you can actually might save lives someday.
Yeah. I mean, it directly so, especially with like metal and like punk. venues where you get skinheads who go to a show and then follow like a black guy outside and like try to beat him to death. Like, you removing those people from the scene saves lives.
Yeah.
And there's like this thread I saw somewhere a while ago about like this journalist who listened to punk and was going to a punk bar, and he was sitting at the bar and it was like dead inside, and it was afternoon, and the bartender's there just like cleaning a glass or something, and the skinhead comes in and he's got like Nazi patches. So the bartender like kicks him out. And the guy like goes, "Oh, what? I'm just here for a drink." And the guy goes, "I don't give a fuck. Get the fuck out now." So he kicks the guy out, and the guy's like, "Oh, that was impressive." And he goes, "I don't want to deal with any fucking Nazis, because the moment you show them any sort of politeness, they're going to bring their friends at your bar, and then their friends are going to bring their friends, and then suddenly you have a Nazi bar situation."
Yeah.
And that's dead on. You got to be like that bartender.
Yeah. Because like if you are a Nazi bar, whether you're political or not, that is like where the Nazism is happening. Like actual Nazism was created in beer halls in Germany.
Yeah.
It was just people shooting the shit and drinking. And that's true of like concerts and anywhere in the whole fucking world.
So I hope you enjoyed this wonderful, pleasant journey through metal. Listen to Panopticon. Panopticon is a very good black metal band. They put out a record a while ago called Kentucky that was focused on coal miners trying to unionize.
That's dope.
Yeah, had good like samples from like people who were involved in the unions talking about how they were like beaten by the bosses and like threatened with hell by parishioner or priests and
woods wizards.
That's what we call priests in my apartment.
Yeah.
We call them woods wizards
in Tennessee.
Yeah. Y'all got you one of them good woods wizards. Y'all going down there on Sunday, get that communion from the woods wizard.
And tune in next week when we play Mythic Fantasy role-playing game.
Yeah, I will open up a PDF and my computer will explode.
It is actually, the acronym for it is MyFarg. MyFarg?
I think it's MyFarg. I don't, it's bad.
The Amazon reviews are the most hilarious thing I've ever seen.
Oh, you got to close this out with these Amazon reviews.
Oh, God. Let's find a good one here. It runs around 220 pages. There isn't much artwork in it. The game is very niche. If you want to roleplay in a fantasy version of the pre-Christian Iron Age of Norway, then this is definitely the game for you. 5 stars.
Oh, God.
Oh, so good.
I mean, I would advocate for people just to play Crusader Kings 3. That's very fun.
That's a good one.
Yeah, I've got a big Satru empire in Eastern Europe, and God damn it, I'm not allowing those Christians in.
The hardcover reviews are better. The best one starts with, "All the controversy and crybaby reviews finally influenced me to buy this." I'm glad I did. Please note this review is written after a few cursory readings of the book.
Cursory readings. I've flipped through and I have not actually played the game.
So good.
Hey.
Oh, genius.
Well, I've been Aaron Simon.
And I've been Robert Sharkey.
Goodbye.